Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Kyle Holton. If you're new around here, would you consider subscribing or clicking the like button that you'll find below this video? It really does help us out a lot as we're trying to help you take another step in your faith journey, whichever step that is. So back in June, I had this really fun opportunity. The lead minister that I work with went on a sabbatical. So for 4 weeks, I got to preach. Now, I've preached for a week or two here and there. I've had some different speaking opportunities, but I'd never taken on something like 4 straight weeks of preaching. It's one thing to come up with one lesson, but to come up with 4 that all flow together was a different kind of challenge. So we sat down before he left and talked about maybe what we would want to talk about, maybe some ideas that our church would benefit from. And we came down to this idea of prayer. This conversation that we have with God. So for the next few weeks, I spent a lot of time reading and praying myself, trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to say. And what I came to was there are a lot of reasons that most of us don't pray. Ultimately, we're too tired, we're too busy, or maybe you just don't feel like prayer actually does anything. See, sometimes we don't pray because we feel like we have to pray for a long time for our prayers to be legitimate. We get to the end of a short prayer or maybe like a pre-written prayer like the Lord's Prayer, and we feel like we have to say something else. We get to the end of it and we're wondering, have I said enough or do I need to keep talking to get God to listen? But there's a pastor and theologian from years ago, his name was Charles Spurgeon, and he said, short prayers are long enough. And sometimes we find that actually saying less in our prayer life with God can actually be better. Because sometimes we get in this space where we just talk and talk and talk, and we never leave any room for God to speak in return. And then we make up all kinds of excuses like, well, God doesn't speak like that anymore. He used to do it, but now he doesn't. So then we start to convince ourselves that God doesn't have anything to say at all when maybe it's just that we won't stop talking. Did your parents ever tell you that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason? So maybe we need to take that same approach, have that same mindset when it comes to our prayer lives. So in this video, I want to offer you 5 prayers that are all 3 words or less that you can pray today. Prayers that you can incorporate into your daily prayer life, into your relationship with God, that I really believe are going to change the way you interact with Him. They'll change the way that you see God, the way that you understand Him, and all of these prayers, if you prayed them all straight through, would take you like 15 seconds. So the first prayer that I would like to introduce you to might sound a little strange at first. It may sound a little bit uncomfortable, but stay with me. I promise this one's going to be worth your time. And the first prayer that I want to introduce you to is, Good Morning, God. Now, this is one of those moments that we have to start with a question. What would it look like if we simply acknowledged God's presence in everything? What would it look like if you started your day by acknowledging that God's already there? That whatever worries or frustrations or fears that you have about your day, God is already there and He's already preparing a way for you. Sometimes you feel like you need to call on God to get His attention, like you need to make an appointment on His divine calendar so that you can have some time to talk, when in reality, He's already present with you. He's already there and you don't have to get His attention. He just wants to spend time with you. So if you started praying like this, how would your mindset change? If you believe that in all of the difficult situations that you have in your life that God is already there with you, how would that change the way that you understand yourself, that you understand the way God interacts with you? Now, the second and third prayers we're going to talk about today are actually connected because they come from a teaching straight from Jesus in Matthew's gospel. Basically, someone comes up to Jesus one day and says, hey, teacher, what's the most important commandment? Like, which one is the one that we really should focus on? And Jesus says, hey, the most important commandment, the greatest commandment, is to love God with your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And then he would turn it and he would say, the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. So the first prayer that comes from this teaching is, God, I love you. Sometimes we need to be reminded to acknowledge and express our love for God. See, we love because He first loved us, and we need to verbalize that in our relationship with God. And the second prayer that comes from this teaching, the third prayer on our list, is, God, bless them. Now, this is one that gets a little bit challenging because naturally when we are saying God bless them, we're turning from inside out, moving from thinking about ourselves to thinking about others. Now, when we say God bless them, we're not just talking about bless those people who line up with me on all of my beliefs. We're not saying God bless the people who vote like me or think like me or look like me or live in my same neighborhood. We're actually talking about those outside of your circle. God bless those people. Bless the people who don't belong to the same political party as me. God bless those people who might even be enemies. God bless those people who insult me. Because what this does is it changes our orientation to other people to see them in the same way that God sees them. To understand that God's view toward other people is that he doesn't choose favorites. All of us are his children. So we learn to pray, God, bless them. So the fourth prayer that I want to introduce you to in our list of 5 is, God, thank you. Now, this one might seem a little bit obvious. Like, well, of course you're supposed to thank God for things. But sometimes we need a reminder to express our gratitude. Sometimes gratitude stays inside of our minds and we never actually speak it. But what we found through studies and through just listening to people tell their stories is that gratitude is the antithesis to discontentment. When you find yourself feeling frustrated, when you find yourself feeling like you don't have something, having a practice of gratitude, actively writing down things that you're thankful for, will change your orientation to the world. Naturally, it moves you from thinking about all the things that you don't have, all the opportunities that you missed out on, instead to all of the things that God has given you, all of the things that are already yours that God has poured into your lap. So our natural response is, God, thank you for doing those things for me. I know for me, this has been one of those practices that has helped me get out of my own way, because I can be really selfish sometimes. I can get really discontent because I find myself wanting something that somebody else has, or I find myself wanting an opportunity that somebody else has been given. But when I sit down and I actively write down things that I'm grateful for, it changes the way my day goes. This is why I do it first thing in the morning. I read my Bible and then I write out 3 things that I'm grateful for. And I try to think of new things every day so that I'm not just repeating, God, thank you for my house, thank you for my family, thank you for my dog. It's always trying to remind myself of new things that God has given me or put into my life so that my orientation is always that of thanksgiving and not of discontentment. So the final prayer that I want to introduce you to, I think, is actually the most difficult. So this prayer is going to come from James chapter 1, and this is the kind of prayer where you start to see growth happening. This is the kind of prayer where you start to feel yourself being stretched. All of the prayers we've talked about so far have been acknowledging things that are already going on in your life that God is doing. You're expressing your love for God, which are all things we should be doing. But this 5th prayer, this is the kind of prayer where God starts to move you a bit. But this is also the kind of prayer where you might start to feel some discomfort. Do you remember when you were a kid and your shins would start hurting or your legs would start hurting? You'd complain to your parents and they would say, oh, you're experiencing growing pains? That's exactly what this prayer is. So James would write in his letter that if you lack wisdom, you should ask God for it and he'll give it to you. Now, this raises the question for me, well, what is wisdom? Because wisdom is one of those words that everybody seems to have a little bit of a definition on. Justin Gerhardt, who has an awesome podcast called Holy Ghost Stories, I'll link it down in the description below, would describe wisdom like this: that wisdom is the willingness and ability to choose what is best as God sees it. So when you look at that definition, all of us can think of a time in our life when we lacked wisdom, when we struggled to choose what was best, when we struggled to choose what was best as God saw it. Or maybe we just didn't have the willingness to actually pursue that. But as James would say, if you lack wisdom, ask God for it and he'll give it to you. So naturally, you are asking God to move you from one place to another, to move you from a place where you are now to a place you are not yet. So we could simplify this prayer to say, God, push me. So maybe you remember when you were learning how to ride a bike, or maybe you were teaching your kids how to ride a bike. And they were doing just fine until they got to a hill and then they just couldn't keep the pedals moving. And then you came alongside them and you put your hand on the back of their seat and you pushed them up the hill. This is exactly what that prayer is. You are asking God to come alongside you and move you from one place to another, from a place you are now to a place that you cannot get on your own. When you start to pray this prayer, big questions will start to come up. And there will be questions that you don't quite know the answers to. But keep praying, God, push me. and you will find answers that you could not have found on your own. It kind of reminds me of the story of Peter in the boat with the disciples, and they're in the middle of a storm, and Jesus is walking out on the water. And then Peter, who doesn't always think before he speaks, calls out to Jesus and says, "Hey, Jesus, if it's you, call me to come out there with you on the water." And then Peter finds himself stepping out over the side of the boat, moving from where he was to a place that he never thought that he would be, and certainly a place he never could have gotten on his own. See, the push me prayer is exactly like that. I'm believing that all 5 of these prayers have the potential to change your life. So let's recap for just a second. The 5 prayers that we've talked about are, good morning, God. I love you. Bless them. Thank you. And push me. These are 5 prayers that I think are going to change your prayer life, not because they are like the secret code, they're not the cheat code to prayer, but rather when you come back to them over and over, when you're consistent in showing up with God and seeing what He can do with even a small amount of time, they change your life. They change your relationship with God and they move you forward, just like that push me prayer. It moves you from where you are now to a place that you can be, but you can't do it on your own. And see, we believe that the power of prayer isn't in the words that you say, but rather in the one that you're praying to. So I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Let me know, which one of these prayers are you going to start praying this week? Are you going to start by acknowledging God's presence in the morning, or do you find yourself lacking wisdom and you're going to start praying, God, push me, move me from where I am now to where I can be? Maybe starting a gratitude practice is what's going to bring you from discontentment all the way into contentment and vitality in life with God. I can't wait to see you in the next one. Don't forget, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, click the like button. It really does help us out. We love being able to walk with you as you take another step in your faith journey, whichever step that is. We can't wait to see you in the next one. Have an amazing day. Grace and peace, my friends.